everybody, welcome to another episode of Vinyl Fetish up here in the vinyl attic on a rainy, cold December night. We're finally moving into fab territory, and it might not be the only time we're in fab territory where we're dealing with one of our top 100 albums that has something to do with the Beatles. So if you remember, we're doing our 100 albums that must be in your collection, the 100 sort of required albums that if you're a vinyl collector you should have to represent kind of popular music. We've been going around the world, but we're going to go back to a place that is near and dear to me, which are Beatle records. In fact, this whole section right here all the way across is all Beatle related vinyl, Fab 4 and solo. So, you know, it's a big challenge to figure out where to start in vinyl Beatle things, because there are obvious things, like you should have Abbey Road in your collection, and you should have Band on the Run in your collection. I wanted to kind of start our journey into Fab Fordom with an album that kind of came off the radar. When it came out, it was a really big deal, and then so many other things happened in the world, it kind of got forgotten, which is Paul McCartney's 1982 album, Tug of War. Tug of War, and I'll explain this little yellow piece of paper that's here in a second. This is a record that essentially was the last Wings album and kind of the last Beatle record, for reasons that I'll talk about. So this album started in earnest in summer and fall of 1980 when Paul was kind of stuck. He'd had his solo album McCartney 2 come out, which was kind of an experimental record and didn't really catch that fire, and he was a little bit kind of figuring out what to do. Wings was kind of dying on the vine, and so he called up old friend George Martin, the Beatles producer, to start working together. They had worked together on the Wings record Live and Let Die, which is one of the best soundtrack songs of all time. So they started recording and working on some music that would become the Rupert and the Frog Pond song for Rupert the Bear. We All Stand Together was started in 1980. But then something happened, of course, and that was December 8th, 1980, when John Lennon was assassinated in New York, a day which will forever be emblazoned into my brain as a 16-year-old Beatle fanatic. And so they stopped working. They stopped working on what was going to be the next Wings album. And in the spring, Paul and Denny and Linda, Wings, and George Martin reconvened to start recording again, mainly in Montserrat and the air studios that George Martin had set up on this Caribbean island to start recording this thing that would probably be the new Wings album. In the process, Paul decided this is a me record, and the stuff that he was writing for that record became some of his best recorded material. That there were moments of evoking side 2 of Abbey Road. You know, the first 3 songs on side 2 of this album that came out were, you know, these little mini operas. And so in the spring of 1982, finally Tug of War comes out, but it's preceded by a single called Ebony and Ivory, which is sort of a plea for racial pluralism, using the piano keyboard as a metaphor, with Stevie Wonder. Paul and Stevie Wonder, two of the greats on the charts of the 70s, kind of finally together in the early 80s. It's a little cloying, you know, it's not the production on it, and the wasn't easy on the ears. The message is wonderful, but it wasn't really an indicator of what Paul was actually working on. But soon after that, a month after that, Tug of War comes out, and listeners and critics and Beatle fans and everybody just falls over themselves. It is so Beatle-esque, partially because George Martin was producing it. Ringo plays drums on several tracks. So it is kind of the last, what would have been a Wings album, but it's also kind of the last real Beatle-y record, because besides the sort of pleas for peace, Ebony and Ivory and Tug of War, and the little cameo from Carl Perkins, which is kind of cool, somebody who was really more of an influence of George Harrison's than Paul's, there is a song on here that finishes side 2 called Here Today, that is Paul's song of grief over the loss of John Lennon. If you were here today, you'd probably laugh. And I remember hearing this record when it came out. I was working in a record store we put it on as soon as it came out of the box and playing it and being so delighted by the music, and then that song Here Today came on and every record store employee sobbing. We're all just like, no, this is so sad. I mean, who knew John better than Paul? I mean, maybe Yoko, but Paul knew him longer. And just the sense of grief that came through in that song. And Paul has played it on tours, which is weird. I wouldn't want to play the song, you know, that is so tragic, right? So tragic. But he continues to play it maybe as a way of healing. With the string quartet, arranged by George Martin and scored by George Martin, just like on Yesterday. So Paul's voice is still sounding very young, so it really sounds like a Beatle record. I went to school in the summer of 1982 when this record was out, and the promotion for it was everywhere. The big single that was coming out with the second single off the record, which was Take It Away. This is my copy that I bought in HMV Records on Oxford Street. And Paul was sort of everywhere again. You know, he was done with Wings, right? We had one non-Wings album, and then we had this one. And so this notion of Paul as the solo artist was kind of coming out, and it was very exciting. And one of the things that was happening when I was going to school there, I would spend many of my days up on Abbey Road or in St. John's Wood, especially in front of 3 Cavendish Avenue, where Paul McCartney has lived since 1966, I think, and hanging out in front of his house and meeting fellow Beatle fans. And I, you know, just almost on a daily basis was hanging outside of his house. In fact, there's one story that I will not tell about how me and this kid from Sweden stole Paul's hefty bag of garbage. It's not good. It's not a good story. But we ended up in Paul McCartney's backyard that day, taking pictures of ourselves hanging out in Paul's backyard. And I'm sorry. I am sorry. I have a deep regret. I was 18 and stupid, and I'm sorry about that, Paul. Anyway, one of the people I met became a lifelong friend, a young woman named Nicola Bound, who lived up on Hampstead Heath. Huge Beatle fan. We met in front of Paul's house, became friends, and she ended up, because she was in the Wings fan club, got to be an extra in the video for Take It Away. She's in the crowd scene, and while she's there, she's like, Paul, I have a friend who's a huge fan from America. We signed an autograph for him, and he wrote it, and he thought that she said, my friend's name is Mandy, so he wrote to Mandy, all the best, Paul McCartney. And then she said, oh no, it's Randy, and handed it back to him, and Paul wrote an R over the M to get my name right. Not that he'll ever remember that, but I think it's kind of cool. Returns Paul to the favor of the critics and shows that he's still got a lot of gas in the tank. There were so many tracks recorded on this album that many of them were just used for the follow-up album, Pipes of Peace, Tug of War, Pipes of Peace, you get the connection. That included the huge hit, Say, Say, Say with Michael Jackson. When this record came out, Paul had a single out with Michael Jackson from his upcoming Thriller album called The Girl Is Mine, which was another kind of cheesy, probably the cheesiest, the definition of cheese, I'm a lover, not a fighter, ballads from Paul in 1982. But Say, Say, Say in 1983 was a much better duet with Michael Jackson, but many of those sessions were from here. And you know what this record makes me think of is the issue of grief. As a sociologist, you know, we always try to bring a little sociology into our discussions. Excuse me. And, you know, we like to say that we're the products of our environment. We're shaped by where we are external, when we are in the world, how big our family is, how nice our parents are, what we watch on TV. All that stuff shapes us. That we're these blank slates that are just written on. But what about the issue of grief? Is grief a human invention? If you lose someone that you care deeply about, and your response is depression or wailing or just sort of uncontrollable emotional feelings, is that something that's created by nurture, or is that nature? Because we know in the animal world, especially animals that live in packs like wolves and elephants, will grieve for the loss of their loved ones. The mama elephants will not leave dead babies or dead children alone. They will actually place dirt on top of them as if to bury them. Animals that are monogamous, like some in the coyote kingdom, will stay with their deceased mate to their own detriment. Swans, when a swan's mate dies, they will wail for weeks at a time. So is grief something that we've sort of invented? Because certainly the rituals of grief are different. Do you stay very quiet and, you know, keep it inside? Do you wail and scream and, you know, call out to the gods? I mean, what we wear when somebody dies, do we wear black? Do we dress in color? Like, those are all cultural expressions of how do we do grief. Like in the WASP world, you're supposed to keep it quiet, right? You don't show any emotion, very quiet. You're there at the funeral, maybe a few tears, don't show any emotion. Other cultures, of course, are very emotional. But what is that notion of grief? Is that something that's very real? And I think, you know, when we look at the comparisons with the animal kingdom, here's an example where something is not a product of our society, that we develop real bonds to people that we call love. And then when they leave us, either consciously walking out the door or leave us because they've been killed, we feel that loss of that connection. That's something that's very deep, and it's not just because we saw, you know, a couple of romantic J-Lo movies that we think love exists. I mean, I think the existence of grief in the animal kingdom and throughout the human kingdom is evidence that there is something called love. Something called love. And so you hear it on this record. You hear Paul's grief for the death of his dear friend John. And we grieve the people that we lost, not because society tells us so, it's because there is some real thing called love that has been damaged by the loss of that person. Just a thought, just a little sociological thought. It's kind of a bummer. Grief. We want to celebrate people while they're here, and we want to remember them in our hearts when they're gone. Paul, we're glad you're still here with us. You're glad you're, you know, about to turn 80 years old next year, so we're really glad that you're still here and making music. This record is such a great moment of everything that we loved about Paul, from the Beatles to Wings to his solo stuff, all on one record, filled with brilliant little hooks and moments. A couple little, you know, rough areas. Ebony and Ivory, I'm not gonna, you know, want sung at my funeral, but this is a really great record. Yeah, I love this record. Next week we're going to be doing another record that is near and dear to my heart. We're going to do Blondie's 1978 album Parallel Lines and talk about why that album is so freaking important. But this record matters. I mean, this moment that he shares with us over his loss of Paul matters. This music matters. You matter. So let's talk about it.